Today you are here for an in conversation, Firelight Media and Homegrown Future Visions. We've got these incredible group of filmmakers and our representative here from Firelight Media. With that said, let's go ahead and meet today's panelists and kind of my co-moderator here. First, let's start with you, Chloe.
Hi everyone, I'm Chloe Walters-Wallace. I'm the Director of Regional Initiatives at Firelight Media. I'm also the Senior Producer on Homegrown Future Visions. So that means that I help to create the idea of this entire initiative, select all these wonderful filmmakers, and we've been on this journey for the last year and some change through the randomness that is life and COVID right now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is RJ Smith. I am a producer on the short film Black Strings. Nice to meet you.
What's up everyone, my name is Marquise Mays. I am the director of Black Strings, but I'm also the Black Lens programmer for Milwaukee Film.
Double duty.
Too much.
I am Tariq Terry. I am from Columbus and I directed the documentary Silsila sequence.
Hi, my name is Amber Love and I directed Lifetimes and I live in Chicago.
Hi, my name is Hao Zhou. I'm from China and now I'm based in Central Ohio. I'm the director of a film called Herald.
Amazing. It's nice to see all of you here today. So first and foremost, Chloe, would you like to frame kind of how this whole idea kind of came together? And then we'll have you guys kind of fill in your portion of it.
Absolutely. I'll start talking about who we are at Firelight. We are a production company and also a nonprofit that supports filmmakers and audiences of color. We are founded by Stanley Nelson and Marcia Smith, who are partners in all things. Stanley is a veteran African-American filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, has been making projects for 30 years. Most recent, Oscar-nominated, oh my gosh, I work there, and it just popped out of my head.
It's only because we're talking about it.
But it's on Showtime, and you should absolutely see it. And we have been working with filmmakers of color, both in feature documentaries and have since started shorts initiatives where we are commissioning filmmakers from across the country, specifically with Homegrown, early career documentary filmmakers who are interested in creating work for a national platform like PBS and PBS Digital Studios. This idea came from my work with, again, early career filmmakers of color conducting labs. We actually did a virtual one with Milwaukee last fall. This is one of our participants here, so just want to say hi. And really just learning about what's happening, being able to bring resources to filmmakers where they live so they can continue to work in film and not have to go to the polls of New York or California, to be able to tell stories from your backyard and not have extractive filmmaking practices come and swoop in, tell stories about your place and then leave. These folks are building community at the same time as creating art, and it's really important to support that platform and those voices. So that's kind of where it started.
Absolutely. Thank you for all of that context, and also thank you for all of your work, very important work that goes into this. So I guess let's start out then talking about what was your journey like to become involved with Firelight Media? Because I know that tonight at the Q&A, I want to save some of that really good content for the post-screening Q&A, but let's talk a little bit about your journey and how Firelight became on your radar and why was it this particular project?
Who's starting?
I could start calling on folks that need me to, but...
Yeah, I think for our project specifically, RJ and I, we both really had a big plan for our film to be a feature film, and we are still pursuing it. But I think at the time that we were working on the film too, we were really trying to consider what story was, what it meant, how do we do the ensemble that we're filming, how do we do them justice, how do we show the fullness of their work. And we knew that we're kind of being, well, at least a little bit me. I was being a little bit hard headed about like, oh, I don't want to do a short. I really want to just go straight to the feature. But as we were working on it and we were hearing from a lot of folks, we were really kind of instructed and kind of pushed to, if you can make a really good short film, the possibilities are endless. And it was a real true test for us to like look at all this footage that we had and how do we condense the fullness of their work into something that is meaningful in a very short form matter. So that was when Firelight came around, and they helped us so much with story. Just like, how do we tell a story from beginning, middle, end in a short form manner? I remember the first cut we turned in was like 45 minutes. And they were just like, this is cute. Don't do that again. They're just like, it's like, this is real cute, Marquise, but get this down to 12 minutes. And I said, okay. But that's how we got involved. Me and RJ and our team just really wanted to do the ensemble justice as much as we could and not reduce their story in any way, but also show the fullness of their work with aspirations of a feature.
Kind of adds a whole new layer to the conversation of restraint, right? You hear a lot of that conversation when we talk about in the short form, especially if you have any hope to kind of becoming a feature film. A lot of times, like that transition, like how do you do it justice in both ways, right? And that does add a different layer to that. And
it was tough, but it ended up being a very great exercise for us because now we have all the ideas for the feature.
Those skill sets are like universal. Right?
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, very cool.
Since we're going.
Yeah. And so I didn't look right at you.
I think as filmmakers, we're very sort of interested in our story. We think our story is the most important, which it is. But how do you conceptualize that to a broader audience and tell it in a condensed way? I think that is what you're saying, Marquise, I believe, and that's what I've learned as well. Coming from the stills world, so this morning we were talking about it as a documentary photographer, telling stories in stills versus motion. To me, I think the language of telling it in motion, but also the conversation of not capturing the image, how to also follow up with all the things that go along with it, such as not only the editing, but also having the conversation with mentors that are mentoring you. How do you say what you want to say? How do you speak your voice to some people that are helping you is one thing I've learned from the experience, that want to root for you instead of you being guarded and saying, I want to do it my way. And how do you open up and get creativity from others as well? I think that, to me, what Firelight has done for me, at least for the past year and a half, they're constantly calling Chloe crazy.
So your phone's been hot. Love that.
It was fun.
Before we move to Amber, I just want to set up another frame. So through this process and initiative, each filmmaker was paired with what we're calling like a cinematic mentor. So a filmmaker who has worked with PBS, who can talk about creative vision, who can talk about what it means to go on a shoot, as well as a consulting editor. So when they were getting to the cutting process and having to deliver a cut every month, really having someone there who can help you process if you get a hard note and you have to, I hate this phrase, but kill your darlings, like the one frame, the one shot that you really love. And me, I'm like, as a commissioning editor, I'm like, I don't think it's working. I'm sorry.
Just killing us.
Exactly. And that happens all the time. So just kind of giving some background to what that looks like.
But we're moving in the same direction, though. And that's the positive thing that I think I had to learn quickly. It's like, these people are to root me and to make me successful. And how can I harness that energy and not look at it from a cut the scene because it doesn't work, which, by the way, there's a scene that I traveled all the way to Africa. Like literally half of my budget went into that scene. And you barely see it. So anyway, go on.
I didn't know that.
No. It works.
It works, but it's still emotional.
Yeah.
I got it.
But it's good.
I will also also say there is not a lot of funding for short films, period.
Yes.
There's even less funding for short films outside of New York and LA, period. None of us live in those places. So Firelight is one of the very few organizations that has been doing work regionally to fund filmmakers where they live. So my film features a family that lives in Lansing, Michigan. That's where I grew up. I've known them for many, many years. The lead and I went to the same high school, many years apart. So it was a film that was really special to me. And I actually had the idea for even a year before Firelight put out this call. So it's the kind of the thing where if you're a filmmaker, like stories, you always have a lot of things in the pot. You got a lot of things boiling. So Firelight came out with the opportunity and it seemed like a really nice fit. I knew that they would take care of me. I knew that they would like what I was trying to do, my themes of Black families and generations. And yeah, I just knew that they would take care of me. So that's how we got connected, basically. I applied and like I said, there's very little funding for that. And so, yeah.
Just to reiterate that point, I mean, just for everyone who's in the room, like there is very little to no funding for short films. Like I want to just say that again with emphasis. Some of my background, I've been a programmer for various festivals. I've worked predominantly in the southern region and supporting different communities in the south. And living and working in these communities, there's thriving arts communities, but also when there's so little to no funding.
Yep.
And then you find yourself in these regional pockets. I think people oftentimes have a misconception of prestige and like a very weird relationship with that.
Yeah.
And you will find there are festivals like Milwaukee and New Orleans that we were just talking about earlier, and Indie Memphis. There are these festivals out, these regional festivals out there that are really doing the work, including organizations like Firelight. That I just wanted to re-emphasize that point because I feel very hot and passionate about that. And I just thank you for saying.
And also funding with distribution.
Right.
Because you make the film and you maybe do a festival tour and then you're like, okay, what do I do now? Video? Like, it's good to have that final goal.
And that's also a good plug for another panel we're having next weekend. So just keep an eye out on that, okay? Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to add one more thing. In speaking about digital shorts and the funding for digital shorts, we started doing these initiatives because even our feature filmmakers of color would make a beautiful piece of work, would get it distributed, and then would have no ability to make their second feature. And so the shorts were a bridge for them to create work, keep using their artistic juices, keep using their creative vision, but also build a portfolio and have calling cards as they're going to more funding, more distributors, and going to festivals so that their names could keep being built. And so that's it's like an economic push in the same time as like an artistic push.
No, it's really great to add to that. And I feel like I was going to say something related to funding too, but you guys said so much. But I still want to add that my project also kind of like struggled with funding. The idea was started in 2019, 2020 when I first come to the Midwest, Iowa to study. I found out there are a lot of international Chinese students, and not just in Iowa City, but in Madison, maybe Milwaukee too. A lot of like college town in the Midwest has tons of like Chinese students, and I was just had the idea I want to make a documentary about them, about their life, especially the queer international Chinese people. And then I found out there's no funding, and then I just waited and I tried for a few pitches and I didn't win, and then until I heard about this Firelight Media funding, and I was like, okay, I wait for a few years. I really need to apply for this funding and I want to make this project. That's how this happened. And I really want to see this is like a really weird funding structure and opportunities because most of the fundings are in the both coasts, and when you look at a lot of projects that filmmakers from both coasts made, it's all about New York, about LA, like which we have seen 1,000 times, so that's why I think it's really important for Firelight Media or organizations like that keep helping the Midwest filmmakers in the South or the regions that hasn't been able to highlighted or spotlighted. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, and not to like go backwards, but kind of how we've just kind of established kind of like this partnership, we've framed it up, established kind of the point of connection. What about your background? Like, how did you get to this point? Did you start in film? You mentioned that you were a documentary photographer. Like, what was it that got you here, before you started this conversation with Firelight? Like, what did that look like? What does your artistic journey look like for you?
Do you want to start, RJ?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that I think like even just thinking about like how I started filmmaking in general, I actually reached out to Marquise. We've known each other for a very long time, went to high school together. And my interest was to, potentially work in the film industry. I was kind of struggling between go back to school for it or, how could I start? But I knew that like at the time, I didn't know that there was, organizations like Milwaukee Film or just in general, like spaces here in Milwaukee that could activate me as a filmmaker. So I was honored when Marquise asked me to work on our first project together, The Heartland, which allowed me to, learn what it took to be a producer. And then from there, we had the opportunity to, work with Firelight Media for Black Strings. So I think being able to stay home while also kind of just like learning the ropes as I'm kind of going has helped me. And it also has like, informed who I am as a filmmaker moving forward. So that's kind of, how that process started. Yeah.
I would say for me, I've always loved film. I've always loved cinema. And I think Milwaukee is a really interesting place because I think a lot of the Black people that live here love movies for a variety of different reasons. But like, I recognized very early on that like, if there wasn't anything to do in Milwaukee, the one thing you could do was go to the movies. And as I was growing up here, I realized like how much the cinema was inaccessible to us at times. So like we used to have like a cinema on the north side that by the time I was 15, it was gone, and then Mayfair, our kind of flagship mall that we have here, they put like restrictions on how old you can be at a certain time. So there's like a lot of different like restrictive areas that couldn't allow us to connect with that thing. So for some reason I moved to journalism and I hated it. I love journalism at its core and I was trained as a journalist, but I really had an issue with objectivity, especially because like I'd be reporting about stuff that like really that had something to do with people who looked like me and it would affect me. And I'm just like, oh, there's no way I could just ignore that. So like I'd get in trouble sometimes and I'd just be writing in a more subjective manner. So then I was just like, I got to find this like weird, like what is it that I really want to do? And I realized that I wasn't as a strong filmmaker when I was an undergrad. So I knew I could write a paper. So I went to study film, like formally, like cinema media studies in film school. And that's when my mind was just blown. Because I was just like, oh my gosh, there's all these different Black filmmakers that I didn't know. Because I was just kind of inundated with mainstream cinema, but all these other Black filmmakers that just had they just played, right? They were very silly in the way that they made things and it made me really excited about doing those same things. So that kind of made my connection to cinema from all those different vantage points. So journalism, being a movie lover, and then also like studying it formally. But when I moved back, I realized again that it was COVID when I moved back. And I'm like, well, I ain't got nothing else to do. I ain't got no job. So I might as well just like mess around and like make something, I guess. But I've always been a very like cerebral person. So like I'm always in my head. I'm always thinking about stuff. So when asking, oh, I have this idea. Does anybody want to work on it with me? RJ like was one of the first people to reach out. And I love working with like folks that like before they love film, but they haven't had that opportunity, because now like a lot of the people on my crew now have like some big credits like that are on IMDb for them that, I think it's a win for all of us, because now it's cool when they go off and do stuff like, and they are able to create work too. So it's not like, oh, we only work for Marquise. No, they're working for themselves now. And that's a beautiful thing too. And that's like the system that hopefully continues in Milwaukee. Like hopefully it just kind of snowballs more in that impact, because Milwaukee as a city, Black filmmakers, they tend to be here. They are from here, but they never come back. But if only people knew, like Milwaukee's like touch point within Black cinema, like they would be like, what? Like soul food? That's somebody from Milwaukee, right? Like Cooley High, you know, Last Dragon. He went to high school with yes. So like Milwaukee got the people, like, and these are people that went to like public schools, Milwaukee public schools, like stuff like that. So it's a beautiful connection to have to the city that I think it's an honor to be in a space to be able to do that with folks that are like really interested in moving that forward. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Marquise.
So for me, I think most of the things you've said, obviously, and I want to ask the audience one thing real quick. When you think about Somalia, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Hot. Okay. Piracy, anybody? Anybody thought about it? Famine. So selfishly, that's the reason why I'm in this business, is to change that perception. No other reason. I am a big fan of visual communication, whether it's filmmaking or photography, or so long as the conversation is happening through the arts, I'm in that space. And the only reason why I'm in it is really to change that perception of what the West thinks of Africa and how Africa is viewed, especially East Africa. So anyway, and most of the things that he said. Selfishly, we want to change perceptions and all this other stuff, and we're in it, that we want to grow all of us together. But really, as a East African, Black African immigrant, Muslim, what does that mean living in the United States with the people who fought for civil rights, and how can I be that person also supporting the civil rights from the 60s and before and during and after, and the rise of Black Lives Matter movement? Where does that African immigrants see ourselves in that platform? I'm in that space, and this is why I make film and direct it.
Thank you for sharing.
I say this a lot, but I think it's important to keep saying. I grew up very economically unstable, and I did not think that film was possible for me. It was in school, it was very focused on like just even get them to college, period, like much less like freelance film stuff. And so there was a lot of push to do like sciences or business or be a lawyer. And so I really thought I was going to be like, go to school and like be a neuroscientist. And like, I worked in a research lab. Like I was very focused on that. But I realized that in the kind of neuroscience space, I was more interested in people, and how people were and why they act the way they do, why they relate, what makes us us, basically. So I moved over to anthropology, which was a much better fit for me. So I come from an anthropological background. And as I kept doing that, I just like movies, I guess. That's kind of a common connection. And so I kind of naturally gravitated that way. But I think more high level, the media that we see and the media that is around us every day has tangible effects on our minds, our opinions, the way that we act in the world. If we continue to see the same types of stories about Black communities, about Somalian communities, about any kind of community that's not in the kind of mainstream space in the United States, we continue to have these incorrect assumptions about the people in those communities, the people in my communities, why they do what they do, why they live the way they live. And I think I grew very tired of stories of like struggle and pain and economic insecurity and how depressing that is. And these kinds of very like heroic narratives of documentaries that pick one person and they like fight against all odds and then they make it out and they're like this hero person. And I think that there are people like that. And I think that that's great. And I think that those stories are important. But I think the stories of the more mundane moments in our lives are also very important. I think the quiet stories, the ones that aren't so much about pain, the ones that aren't so much about struggle. I like watching my dad, like these stories that I live that I don't get to see. And so I also work in programming for film festivals. I also work as a documentary editor. And so a lot of my work, even when I'm not making films, is thinking a lot about what are the films that make it through to the popular imagination and how can we change the way those look and the things that they say for people who might not live in those communities to get a better and clearer sense of what it's like to live in those communities or be of that community. That's all like weirdly high level, but I think it's important. And that's very much a lot of why I am here at all.
Cool. I will add like very similar to you guys again. It's like I don't want when I turn on either TV or look at media, there's only crazy rich Asians or Asians have like immigrant here to open Chinese restaurant or laundromat or we are much more diverse group, have different kinds of people from very different socioeconomical background. That's why I decided like in Iowa, I want to follow my protagonist Z, who's coming from an underprivileged background, and Z's family, for example, saved up the all the monies to support Z to study in the US. And I just want to tell a different story, different like anti-stereotypical Asian story in the US. And that's what happened when I arrived here, I guess. But before coming here, before 2019, I actually started as a narrative filmmaker. So yeah, this is my first documentary project. I also actually want to comment on what Chloe was saying about a lot of people made their first feature film and then they didn't get a chance to make second feature film. And that happened to me too. I made a feature narrative film and luckily it went to a very good festival, Berlin. And then after that, I couldn't make my second feature film. So it is very important to have the support for the filmmakers to make short documentary projects so you can keep practicing, keep your portfolio growing, and then, maybe someday you can make your second project. So I think that idea is really, it started in a way that is really care about the filmmakers that, it's not like, oh, you made your first move and then you can do whatever you want. That's not true. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Question. I'm putting my co-moderator hat on.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I appreciate Bridget so much. That was all really beautiful, guys. Thank you. And I think it feeds into the question I want to ask. Homegrown is the initiative, but each year it's like a different theme. So this year was Future Visions, and the idea is all these folks kind of pitched what they saw as the future of their communities from their own perspectives. And I feel like all of the things you talked about are also very present in your films and connected to that theme. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the content of your films and how that connects to Future Visions and just how you're seeing it now from your community after making projects.
Yeah.
Question.
Do you want to start?
Oh yeah, and as I mentioned a little bit really about my film, I really want to tell a story about a Chinese international student who is not what general American audience think about, like, they're from rich family, they come here to get a degree and then they go back to China because, the US education is more like a decoration for their career because they're from a very super privileged family. So I met my protagonist Z, who's from a family that is very different than that. And Z's goal is actually to get a good education and stay in the Midwest, stay in Iowa and work for a hospital as a nurse. So I thought like that's a very different kind of story than a lot of this like Hollywood. Asians are very hot right now in Hollywood, but I feel like in some way they are still stereotypical kind of like Asian portray instead of like who are the Asians who are struggling, right? And I just want to show that because personally, I also related to that experience. And I think it's important to show a Chinese or Asian international student who's also part of the LGBTQ community, because that's something not many people are aware of. They think, they just don't think, I don't know, like international students are part of the queer community here, which is also hard for them to be integrated in this local queer community. So I met Z and I thought like, oh, I really want to make a project about Z's journey in Iowa. Yeah.
So my film, like I said, is set in Lansing, Michigan, and it follows 3 turning into 4 generations of Black community leaders and activists. They have roots in Chicago, but 2 generations ago, they moved to Lansing. And that's like a very big topic to try to do in a short film, talk about restraint. I have very little, it's okay. It was fine. So for me, it was a project about love and hope, just in spite of or next to the fact that social justice and like racial equity work is generations of work. It is something that many people hope to see movement in their generation, and we often see some, but there is no like end. There's not necessarily like a goal that we can all get. I hope that we get there. I guess I don't want to be pessimistic about it. But there is an understanding that like when I die, like there has to be another generation to continue to move forward. My generation is not going to solve all of these problems. So for me, the film is very future-facing because one of the lead protagonists essentially has a 3-year-old daughter and like a 10-year-old niece who are very much watching her and her mother run for local office and try to do this work in their communities of bettering the conditions for not just Black people, but there are quite a few different communities in Lansing. It's a big refugee resettlement community. So yeah, that's really the content of my film. And yeah, it was very important to me to think about the question of how do you pass that on to next generations? And do you really know exactly what you're passing on? Like there's a heaviness there too. It's not necessarily just like, oh, like we're gonna do it. You go forward and you'll take it on and it'll be great. It's not great, it's very tiring. It's very stressful. But to have that kind of like lineage to look back on is one of the really clear ways that like continues that push forward and that hopefulness. So tried to capture that. It's like 14 minutes, you know, we got there. It's good.
Now that is some restraint.
Put the footage on the graph.
So I guess my film is about, so I'll set the backdrop real quick. As you know, most immigrants, when they first arrive here, survival is the first thing they do. Jobs, housing, healthcare. How can we get to the American dream as quickly as possible? And then you have the second generation that is being pushed to do what the parents couldn't do, which become doctors, and you got to push through, and this is what you need to do to survive. But you also have, within that context, there's also the other part in which this generation that is being born in the United States, how are they keeping the tradition and the stories about Somalia into the forefront of a conversation? In other words, in the old country, as European immigrants used to say, there were archives being kept, what Europe used to look like, or you can do the research of what Europe looked like. But for African immigrants, that is also being lost within the African context as well. So the archivability of the colonial history of Africa, the progress of Africa, there are generations here in the United States, young Somali people who are taking in charge of that, buying it back from Europe the colonial Europe. Imagine going to Italy and saying, I need this back on your own without any governmental support. So the story is about that, but also the story is about after you survived, how else can you communicate in the United States in the American art language? And instead of just going to a job and that's it, how can the second generation compete in a artistic language? And so the documentary is about following a group of people that said, we are going to do just that. We are going to take our own history and future in our own hands and not waiting for somebody else to hand it to us. So I'm very excited for you guys to see it.
Okay, the content of my film Black Strings, it follows the Black String Triage Ensemble. So I remember back in 2020, in the middle of us working on Heartland, I got a Facebook message from our main protagonist, David Hallman, who's here. Yes. Yes. I got a message from him, and I think, you know, to live in Milwaukee is to live with this understanding of loss that I think feels very different at times, and I think we navigate it in a variety of different ways. And I think I'm even started to recognize the way that we choose to honor folks has always been unique, whether it is, you know, spray paint t-shirts or like shoes on the telephone lines. Even like most recently on the north side of Milwaukee, there's like a lot of billboards that are being put up of like rest in peace or, you know, happy birthday. So I think I always think that Milwaukee is a city of people who are just really hurt, that are trying to find a lot of different avenues to express that hurt. And they use a lot of creative avenues to do so. So when I had the conversation with David, the Black String Triage Ensemble, during the summers in Milwaukee, they go to active crime scenes and perform at the scene of the crime. And they do a meditation on grief based on the 5 stages of grief through string instrumentation. So it's a group of Black and Latinx string musicians. The violin is closest to the human voice. So that is their instrument of choice because it is able to kind of impede into us a little bit more. And if we all know like the history of Black folks and violins, especially during like the slave trade, and that being one of the first instruments we learned how to play in this space. So they do that. They typically play Black and Latinx composers as well. So that's the content of the story. Now, again, I think there's so many other layers to it. The ensemble themselves have beautiful and complicated histories with grief in their own lives, whether that's a loss of a person, a loss of innocence, a loss of like structure or whatever that may mean, that I think, again, restraint in 12 minutes, we can't tell all their business. But I think the beauty is that this group is an intergenerational group, right? Like you have someone who's in their late 70s, and the youngest that was in the film as well, the youngest was in his early 20s. You know, and that's like, it feels like a lifespan of experience. And I think the group themselves, when we began to film them, it was, you know, I think a lot of folks, especially when they hear the log line of our film, a lot of folks in the industry, when we were like kind of pitching it, trying to just understand how to make it, a lot of folks were really interested in the crime scenes themselves, obviously, like for shock value and for what that could mean. But I think, and I think RJ could also speak to this too, is it's like, I think we found the most like beautiful moments when we were just waiting, like with one another, whether it's like us waiting and playing like Cards Against Humanity or like eating like sherbet and like ice cream while we wait, or just like those moments are really beautiful. And a lot of those moments we did not film, right? Like we decided to cut the camera off or just like take a break from the camera as well. So the content of the story follows them as an ensemble. And the 12 minutes is very short. So obviously we couldn't include as much as we wanted to about the characters, so like, and who they are as people. So you get kind of more so an overview of the work. But even that does not scratch the surface of what they have signed up to do, because this is a choice, right? But all in all that to say that like we wanted to tell a story about this group in Milwaukee that deserves to be recognized, deserves to be heard, but at the same time similar to this conversation about like it's really hard to fund a short film in the Midwest. Imagine, trying to fund like organizations or forms of activism in a city. Like that's even harder to do, especially when a city has devalued musicianships and music and classical instrumentation and instruments, period. I remember in 3rd grade, I played piano, and then by 6th grade, I didn't have music, right? Like that's,
Right.
It's crazy, right? So the film as itself is not necessarily for like me and RJ. It's for the ensemble then to use as like not necessarily, because they don't need to validate themselves in any space, because the work that they do speaks for enough. But it is then to be used for like grant funding, hopefully, so that they could support themselves in other manners. So if the film could be used in that way, use it. Yes, we wanted to do it cinematically, and we wanted to add those elements and do it differently from how news organizations were reporting them, because I felt they weren't getting the essence of who they were as humans. So the film like serves to be an opportunity to say, hey, like this is happening, but also if they wanted to apply for like nationally endowed grants, like they have, like here's what we do, so that we don't have to keep telling you, because it's exhausting to keep telling people why what we do is important. Just watch this and then call us if you have the money. But if not, leave us alone. It's like, it's just to get to the point, like watch this movie so I don't gotta run my mouth, because it becomes a little bit too much to do. But I do wanna give like honor and reverence to the ensemble for allowing us to tell their story, because that, I think them trusting us means a lot. But I also want to give reverence to my crew members. So RJ as producer and assistant director, and then also Caleb in the back as DP and cinematographer. I want to give reverence to my crew, because they, we was at them crime scenes too, and we had to be very crafty, and we had to be very minimal in how we shot things, and we had to be very smart, and we had to consider ethics at all times, as we all should, but there are like always conversations that I would have with my crew members, and I couldn't make every single one, and we all could make every single one. But the beautiful thing was, when I was looking through the footage, when I actually decided to look through the 12 terabytes that we have, when I was actually looking through it, it was some nights that when I wasn't there, it'd just be RJ and Caleb that were there, and every discussion that we had, every rule that we created, they followed. And they upheld it. And that just is a testament to who they are as filmmakers and as like craftsmen and craftspeople. So I want to give reverence and honor to them for like listening to me and being like, okay, Marquise said this, we're gonna honor that. But then also still being very artful in the way that they like show the ensemble and build relationships with the ensemble themselves. I said one of the ensemble members that you'll see her tonight, her name is Alita. She's like our social media manager. Like she's always posting. I'm just like, thank you, girl, because we need that. I forget sometimes that we have a movie coming out. So yeah, like that's just a roundabout way to say that like the content is solely there for amplification and to push them forward, as opposed if it pushes our careers forward, then that's great as well. But like I think it's more so like, let's use this for them as an offering and a gift. And yeah, that's that. Do you have anything to add?
It's not much I can add, no. But I do want to add that even just thinking about, when you make documentaries, like there is no real guideline, like, there aren't real parameters. So when we think about like the ethics and like the morality around like what we're filming, we wanted to be conscious about like what that meant as far as impact. So even just like creating the educational discussion guide, right? So that way, as we're addressing some of these themes of like loss and grief, like we have a resource for people and our viewers to like critically not only watch our film, but then also to like have a relationship with whatever comes up with, that watching the film in general. Because the film it tackles a lot, right? Like we're at these crime scenes, like all these moments are different. So I think like we were intentional about like how we wanted to impact the community around us. And then hopefully, that can lead to conversations elsewhere. But we wanted to be, really intentional about how we tackle some of those conversations.
And I just want to add that in terms of the future visions of it all, like for me, this film really looks at what the future of care is. Like what the future of care for our communities could look like and should look like. And why should there only be, specific designated folks who care for us when we already know that we've been caring for ourselves and have had to for years. The last 3 years have been like a complete like indication of that. How can we care for each other? And what does the future of this look like in musical form? You know, as a nurse, you know, as an art space, as people running for office, like what does that look like? So we say the future, but really it's always been happening. And it's more of just bringing these visions to the forefront of understanding what America is changing and has been changing, and the Midwest is changing. And at the same time, it's, for me and for many others, not coming from here, it was really an exploration of, I know that the Midwest is not all white corn, like vanilla, as it has been like shown. Like, where are the people? And here are the folks who are like bringing that to us, which has been really good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I know that we only have a few minutes, and I thought we were going to leave more time for questions, but everything you've been giving all of us in this room has just really been a real gift to really set up nicely for the screening tonight that I know I have been looking forward to so very, very much, to be, you know, moved by your work as individuals, the stories, the peoples that you are capturing within your communities. I am just so excited. I don't know if anybody has any questions that they want to pose to any of our panelists while I'm making one of my last comments, and not to go backwards here, but I think for any filmmakers in the room, I think it's really important to take note of the varied experiences of each and every one of you. And I think it's really important to like frame that. And, you know, someone who's like, you know, RJ, you were talking about like, you know, I did this and then I did this, and, you know, and then you've got, you know, Amber, you've done a few films, right, that I've been familiar with just because I've programmed your work before, and then everything in between, and then more and then less and all of this, but none of that ultimately matters, right? You guys are all incredible artists, and you have something important to say, and everybody should hear it. And I know that we at Milwaukee Film are incredibly honored to be the second screening of this program, and I hope that it does it justice this evening, and that you enjoy interacting with our audiences. But thank you so much for being here, for participating, for investing in your communities, and telling and explaining to all of us why it is so, so important. So I thank each and every one of you for being here. And I think that will conclude today's conversation. If you guys want to mingle for just a few minutes, you want to talk to our panelists for a little bit longer, I do have a heart out for them in a few minutes. So I will be joining. But thank you all again so much for joining us today, and you too. So thank you so much for all of your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.